Well, I wanted to talk today about the evolution of creationism.
Okay,
and I
now
haven't
there's a
gotten
term you don't hear every day.
I haven't gotten a sound off on creationism for a little while, and I thought, well, I haven't been on the show for 2 months. I feel like doing that now. I'd like to start off by saying that I am not qualified to talk about evolution. And I mean, you know, my degree is in computer science. And you know, I want to stress that because a lot of people claim to be experts on evolution. What makes you an expert on evolution is being an expert on biology, which is a scientific field. It, you know, people devote their entire lives to studying this stuff. And a lot of people who are basically religious people, or have degrees, but they come from unrelated fields like engineering or mathematics or astronomy, claim to be big authorities on evolution when in fact they exhibit not the first clue of how it's actually supposed to work. But when people think about evolution, I think they tend to fall into one of two camps. Either they think that evolution is a raging controversy among scientists, and that maybe it's about to topple any day now, or you know, there's huge bitter disputes among scientists about it, or they think that all creationists are just ignorant yahoos. The fact is that neither one is the case, and that there are some very smart, if not necessarily qualified, creationists out there. Let's see. So I'm going to give sort of a whirlwind history of creationism, and I'd also like to mention that creationism, you know, we have sort of a limited perspective here in the United States because it turns out that creationism is actually a very uniquely American phenomenon. Over there in Europe, mostly, they can't believe that so much time is devoted in the American political system to talking about this stuff. Which is not to say that there aren't exceptions. I mean, there are little pockets of creationism here and there all over the world. There's a very funny group run by a guy named Ken Ham in Australia. But mostly, most of the people you'll see dredged up as creationist authorities will come from right here in the good old U.S. of A. Yes, something else that we do better than everyone else.
Joy.
I don't know why that is. I mean, you know, we have some kind of weird fundamentalist leanings over here that just don't happen in most of the rest of the world, except for the crazy Muslims over there in that other area.
And that could be a whole different show topic there as to why this country is so much more religious than Europe,
yeah, and I have my own theories about that, but I'll go into that some other time.
Yeah, that's beside the point here.
Of course, evolution is also a very big subject, so I'm not going to have time to give a huge defense of why evolution is a solid scientific theory. But I'm gonna be blunt here. Evolution is not a scientific controversy. I mean, at all. It's certainly a political controversy, it's a religious controversy, it's a huge controversy in that sense, but if you look within the ranks of trained scientists who do things like study biology at school for years and make theories which get tested by other scientists and publish in mainstream scientific peer-reviewed journals, you'll find that there aren't any creationists.
No.
There are very smart people and even people with a lot of initials after their name, but again, they tend to come from other fields. So the first time that fundamentalism clashed with evolution here in the United States that got big press coverage was in 1925 in a little case called Tennessee versus Scopes. This took place in Dayton, Tennessee. It's also affectionately referred to as the Scopes monkey trial. And it's been hyped up and fictionalized a bit. It's been made into a well-known play called Inherit the Wind, which was also translated into several great movie versions. I recommend the Spencer Tracy version especially. That's a great flick. So basically what happened in the Scopes trial was that there was a law on the books that said that you just couldn't teach evolution in Tennessee. Part of the reason that I say this has been fictionalized a bit is that John Scopes, the defendant, was not actually the hapless character that was played by Dick York in the movie, who was just being pushed around by the creationists. No, he was actually part of a larger group that was intentionally trying to test the constitutionality of that law. So Scopes went ahead and tested and taught evolution in school. He wasn't even a biology teacher, actually.
Okay. Just snuck it in among the social sciences.
Well, I mean, he wasn't specifically a biology teacher.
Yeah.
He moonlighted,
General
I guess.
Do you know
and he basically dared the authorities to come after him, and they did. And some of the most famous lawyers of the day, Clarence Darrow and William Jennings Bryan, fought for the evolution and creation sides, respectively. And it was a huge media circus. In fact, one of the first huge media circuses at a trial in history.
Wow. Okay.
What were you going to ask?
Do you know any of the history on that as to why or how that law got there in the first place?
No, but I would think that it was commonplace in those days because, I mean, you know...
It's just kind of strange that they would say, here's something that you cannot teach in schools.
Right.
I don't think there's any laws out there right now that you can't teach, Holocaust denial.
I mean, Tennessee, to start with, is deep in the heart of the Bible Belt.
True.
And, religion in general has had sort of a sticking point throughout history with new theories that seem to dethrone the importance of the Bible in society. For instance, there was a little scrap, so I've heard, between church and science in the 16th century when Copernicus was suggested that the Earth actually goes around the sun instead of the other way around.
Kind of nifty new ideas.
Yeah. It's interesting. The church didn't initially oppose that, but they gradually decided that they didn't like that the more popular it became.
Okay.
And, the Catholic Church was the main offender, but Martin Luther, the founder of Protestantism, also had a few things to say about how Copernicus was a fool who was trying to turn the natural order of the universe on its head. So, evolution was not the first conflict.
Yeah.
But it is the one that's most recently in history because you can't find a lot of people who defend the geocentric universe anymore. So anyway, technically, Scopes lost in Scopes versus Tennessee, which is to say he got a slap on the wrist and then he went back to teaching evolution. But, it was still okay to have those laws until a long time later in another case, 1968. So jump ahead quite a good many years. The 1968 case was Epperson versus Arkansas, when this sort of law finally got to the Supreme Court, and they decided that no state is allowed to ban the teaching of evolution because it goes against that part of the First Amendment that says that Congress can make no law
respecting freedom of speech.
Respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Okay. The Establishment Clause would be what they're interested in. Any law that said that the schools couldn't do that would be in violation of establishment.
Okay. Yeah.
But even before that case came to court, it was clear for a long time that, real science was getting more popular and creationism was gradually losing ground because it was widely perceived, with good reason, as being non-scientific and just, a bunch of religious guys trying to get their religious beliefs taught as the truth in schools, which, is not what this country is about. It's about pluralism.
Yeah.
So a new movement started to spring up in the early 60s, kind of spearheaded by a guy named Henry Morris. Morris wrote a couple of books. In 1961, he wrote a book called The Genesis Flood, where he presented a theory which is, in good standing with creationists all the way up to today, which is that most of the geological features we see on the Earth can be explained by a big flood.
Okay.
Just like, coincidentally, the one that appears in Genesis in the story of Noah.
Yeah.
Except that this was supposed to be scientific. He presented a lot of arguments for why this was actually good science. And he followed it up with another book called Scientific Creationism 13 years later in 1974, when he laid out a broader defense of creationism. So by doing this, he hoped to get it more accepted by the scientific community. It didn't work. And, it didn't work because there was a little problem, like, what would you say? Oh, no evidence.
Well, if he was presenting actual, or at least what he perceived to be,
right,
arguments and evidence.
He was presenting arguments, but,
Okay. Because it seems like a lot of creationists, when I have seen them, they don't offer any evidence of their own.
Right.
They don't say, here's
creationism. A lot of
and
creationism is just bashing evolution, basically.
Exactly. They have nothing to say on their own except evolution sucks.
Right.
Okay.
And then if evolution sucks that much, then there's only one possible alternative, and that would be creationism.
Exactly. Okay. So his was more of the same.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, it was the first, so it wasn't more of the same yet.
Good point.
But I mean, the problem with trying to be taken seriously by scientists is that there's this whole scientific method. I mean, you just can't put some arguments in a book and publish the book and get a lot of people to read it and then say, see, that's science now. No, I mean, in science, you actually have to present your theories to other scientists instead of laymen. Other people who are trained in spotting BS.
Yeah.
And then the scientists get to go through this period of beating it up and picking it apart and looking for holes in it. And, in the case of scientific creationism, or in the case of the Genesis flood especially, that's just not hard to do, because there's no evidence for a worldwide flood and a lot of evidence that it didn't happen, especially a flood that supposedly killed off almost everybody in the world. Because, one little problem with that is, like, among many problems, there would only be a couple of hundred people around to build the pyramids, and that's assuming that everybody in the world lived in Egypt.
True, yes. Well, that's where the aliens come in.
Oh, yes. But anyway, but Morris didn't publish in scientific journals, obviously. I mean, they don't really care that much about getting scientists to accept it. What they mainly care about is getting everyone else to accept it, so they try to shoehorn it into public schools. Yeah. In fact, this became a big part of the movement, so that several laws sprung up that says, okay, you can teach evolution if you wanna, but you have to teach creationism too and give it equal time. So at this point, they've moved away from trying to shut down evolution completely, because that didn't work. So they've tried to force creationism to stick around. But that didn't work either, because when the 80s came along, there were a couple of big cases that shot this down. In 1981, you had Maclean versus Arkansas, which contested Arkansas's Act 590, where they mandated that evolutionary biology instruction must be balanced with creation science. The court quite rightly ruled that, this isn't science, and you can't force people to teach it, because, again, the only reason to teach it is it's religious. Yeah. Similar case, 1987, Edwards versus Aguilard. By the way, this book, which a crew member handed me right before, The Triumph of Evolution and In Mirror Image Letters and the Failure of Creationism, written by Niles Eldredge, who took part in this trial. So this is a pretty good book. I've read it.
Okay.
So let's see. So for a while after these two cases, it was pretty much obvious to most people that evolution had won. And you didn't hear a lot about creationism in public schools for a while. I mean, you would, they would pop up here and there. But it wasn't taken that seriously because there were already two great big Supreme Court precedents that said, no, you don't have to teach creationism.
Okay.
About the worst it got, actually, I was in high school in 1988. And in my freshman year, I got a creationist biology teacher. I didn't find out he was a creationist until much later because he didn't teach creationism. He just skipped evolution of his own volition, which is legal. But it also pretty much turned me off of biology for a long time because I thought it was just memorizing a bunch of facts.
Yeah.
If I had a better biology teacher in high school, maybe I wouldn't have gone into computer science. But anyway. Something new happened in 1996, and this is why I'm going to say that you have to be on your guard, because creationists aren't just a bunch of young Earth yahoos.
Yeah.
A lot of them still are. But they changed strategies in 1996, and it's important to be aware of this. This was a new movement that was called intelligent design. And it was spearheaded by, what do you think, a biologist, a scientist?
Pope?
A lawyer! Which kind of supports my point that this isn't a scientific controversy, it's a political or legal one.
Yeah.
This guy is named Philip Johnson, and he had been speaking out for years about how evolution makes you evil, which is another thing they like to harp on. That evolution destroys God and purpose, and
if we're all just a bunch of monkeys, then we can act like monkeys, and there's no repercussions.
Right, and he had a lot of legalistic things about agreeing that you should teach creationism as equal time, because that's how lawyers think. You have two sides, they both get to argue, which isn't how science works.
Yeah.
I mean, both sides do get to argue, but if one side is conclusively shown to be stupid, you stop including it.
Yeah.
Which is not necessarily so much the case in law.
Yeah.
So in 1996, Philip Johnson posted or wrote a little known, or at least it was at the time, a little article called The Wedge Strategy, which we've talked about before on the show.
Yes, many times.
But, there's nothing wrong with repeating it. This basically laid out the groundwork for the new intelligent design movement, which was, we are we do still believe in God, but our legal strategies have been failing so far. And the reason they've been failing is because creationism looks like religion. We've been telling them, hey, we want you to teach the biblical theory of origins. And theory is loose because theories are things that go through the whole scientific gauntlet of getting beaten up.
Yeah.
And
in the scientific view.
Right. And even scientific creationism never went through that because they just published a bunch of popular books and called it science.
Yeah.
The Wedge Strategy, though, said, okay, here's what we're going to do now. We're going to do intelligent design. And I don't think they had coined that term yet. I think that was Dembski's idea. But intelligent design is really nice because it's all fluffy and doesn't say anything specific. And in fact, the strategy of intelligent design is to say, okay, there's an intelligent thing out there. And he designs stuff.
Yeah. But it's not God.
It could be God.
Could be.
But we're not going to say it's God.
Yeah.
Of course, they all believe it's God.
Of
really.
Course. Yeah.
they all say that they believe it's God. Anyone who talks about intelligent design, go look for some background material on what they're really trying to promote. They all believe it's God.
Yeah.
Anyway, Philip Johnson is kind of what I consider the holy trinity of intelligent design. Philip Johnson, of course, is the lawyer. He's the PR guy. There's a fellow named Michael Behe who wrote a book called Darwin's Black Box, and he, interestingly enough, was a biochemist. Okay. So he's one of the guys who's qualified to talk about evolution. But, you know, the dirty little secret of the intelligent design movement is Michael Behe believes evolution. Yeah. He flat out states in the introduction to Darwin's Black Box, yeah, evolution, you know, I can accept that it's true. And in fact, I can even accept that evolution explains all of the complexity, that we all came from a common ancestor. Yeah. But random mutations, they're not enough to account for all this diversity. So God, or excuse me, intelligent designer man must have nudged it here and there along the way. But I find this really funny because Behe seems to be the only published biologist in the group, and he believes almost all of evolution is true. Okay. So, you know, the more educated you are in that specific field, yeah, the more likely you are to actually accept evolution as the best fit for the available evidence. So there's Philip Johnson, there's Michael Behe, and the third guy is William Dembski, who is a pure mathematician. You know, again, some of these people are smart guys. They have initials after their name. They know a lot of stuff. But Dembski in particular knows a lot about math. And math is different from science because in math, something either, you know, the equation either balances or it doesn't, to put it in simple terms. There's not this whole, you know, let's look at the evidence, let's, you know, compare it to known evidence, let's see how it squares up with the rest of the scientific theories that we know are pretty accurate. Yeah. So math is not science, and what Dembski tries to do is prove, using pure math, that if something is this complex, and he has this whole system for counting up complexity, then it must be designed. You know, he hasn't published this theory in biology journals, certainly. But, you know, complexity theory is a real thing in math. So anyway.
But that's math.
Right.
Not biology.
Yeah. And you won't find a lot of biologists who go for this stuff. So Philip Johnson, in his document, The Wedge Strategy, which I think was supposed to have only private distribution, but it got found by some guys
put on the internet.
And put on the internet. And once it's on the internet, something never ever goes away. And basically it said, okay, look, we really want God to come back into our schools, but the strategies we've been taking don't work. So what we're going to do is we're going to come up with a way to talk about creationism without talking about God. And they said that we want to go through 3 phases. In the short term, we want to do scientific research, writing, and publicity. In the medium term, we want to do publicity and opinion making. And in the long term, we want to do cultural confrontation and renewal. That sounds very Orwellian, doesn't it? Where, you know, first they're going to get scientists to go for this intelligent design stuff. Then we're going to stick intelligent design in the textbooks and get it as part of the language of this new generation of school kids that's growing up. And then, you know, we're going to say, aha, rip away the curtain. See, evolution is a fraud.
Yeah. And all of that sounds perfectly good.
Sure, except they seem to have skipped phase 1.
Which is kind of the important one there.
Right. What passes for scientific research, writing, and publicity was not, again, publishing in scientific journals, letting other scientists beat up on their theories, but publishing it in popular books, getting a whole bunch of people to read it, getting it on bestseller lists, And then they say, see, lots of people accept this.
Yeah. Getting Joe Yokel to agree with this theory does not make it true.
Right. I've got good news, though. This hasn't really worked either. You know, they tried to get it in, I mean, like, there a few years ago, you know, Kansas, what did Kansas do? I can't even remember now, but
I'm not sure.
But the Kansas school board said that either you have to teach creationism or you have to include a disclaimer in your textbooks of evolution saying, you know, this book talks about evolution, which is nonsense. Well, it didn't really say that, but it was.
It puts it in the light of this is just a theory. It's just somebody having a good idea, and that's all it is, which is bupkis. But
well, again, theory means that it's run through the bunch of scientists beating it up, and it's come out strong enough that that it hasn't been discredited, and so it's considered a really good point from a scientific standpoint.
Yeah, a layman's idea of theory is that's kind of a good idea.
Right. So. That's not what a scientific
that's
theory
not a scientific theory.
Yeah. But I got to see what the next step of creationism is when I went to the textbook hearings on September 20th, I believe, of last year. And I noticed, you know, I got to testify, which was fun, but I also got to see what the creationists are doing now. And they're no longer even trying to get intelligent design in the textbooks because, you know,
it's blatant what they're doing.
Don't think there's anything to it.
Yeah.
So instead of putting intelligent design in, they say, look, you know, there's all these little details in evolution that don't really measure up. They have a whole bunch of little things like peppered moths and pictures of embryos that they nitpick, basically. Yeah. And they say, well, these are wrong and they're still in the textbooks. So, you know, we want you to put a little sidebar saying, you know, this has been discredited or something.
Yeah. Just because we don't have perfect knowledge.
Right. Well, and I love, if you go to our website, I actually have an archive of a lot of great speeches that were given at this. And one of my favorites was Alan Gishlick from the National Center for Science Education. And he said, look, these guys don't care about science. If they really cared about correcting these errors, then they'd say, take them out of the textbooks. Yeah. But they don't say that. They say, leave them in and criticize them, which is sort of an overall attempt to undermine public opinion of how science, and, you know, science education in this country is pretty bad. Kids just don't understand how science works. Anyway.
Okay. Speaking of all the...
So that brings us up to present times where they're still popping up every few months in a different state, where they're trying to promote something or other in the school boards that supports creationism in some way.
Okay.
But, you know, keep fighting the good fight, because scientifically, there's nothing to it.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Again, we are live today. We are going to take callers in a little bit. We can definitely put the phone number up and, like I say, try and get some calls in. But speaking of all the scientists that you're saying, Behe and Dembski and da-da-da-da-da, there was a video that I think was, I can't believe if it was sent to the TV show or to me directly through, you know, an email chat or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I want to say it was called The Origins of Life.
Okay.
But I'm really not sure. But the way it presented it in the beginning was like, you know, early this year, and this was a couple of years back, you know, a small group of scientists who had issues with evolution were getting together to discuss their ideas. Mm-hmm. And they have a new theory which could topple the entire scientific community. And it was all these guys talking about their creationism stuff.
Right.
And the 90% of the show was on one specific part of the cell. They have, I can't remember what it's called.
That sounds like Michael Behe's deal.
Yeah, but there's one little part of the cell where you essentially got like a motorboat type thing.
The cilia. That is definitely, no, the flagellum.
The flagellum, that's it, yeah.
That is definitely Michael Behe's deal. And, You know, his deal, of course, I forgot to mention, is irreducible complexity.
Yeah.
And, you know, the idea of irreducible complexity has already been through the scientific gauntlet, and it lost. I mean, he gives this great example of a mousetrap and says, look, you can't take any parts away from the mousetrap without it working. And a lot of people showed, well, even your example is lame because you can.
Yeah, yeah. And there are a lot of websites out there actually that show a whole mousetrap evolution just from, you know, a piece of wire.
Right.
In a circle, basically.
Yeah. But I mean, you know, again, Michael Behe is a smart guy, has biological credentials. All he has to do is publish these ideas in scientific journals and get them to be taken seriously, and then we'll teach them in schools.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, they're allowed to get their views in. We're not trying to censor them. We're just trying to say, if you've got a good idea, then let's hear the evidence for it. If you've got evidence, then sure, go ahead and teach it. Because it's
dishonest to force public schools to teach something as scientific that just hasn't been demonstrated to scientists in a satisfying manner.